Good morning, dear students. I am Professor أ.د.حازم عتلم. This is our course relating to international organizations. As you know, because of the virus of corona, we will give our course today here online for about 1 hour and a half. As you know, our present course together relates to legislative or normative functions of international organizations. I mean from page 91 to page 126 in the book. It was presumed that the following course will relate to the chapter beginning from page 127, the chapter relating to executive and administrative functions of IOs, beginning from 127 to page 164. This chapter, executive and administrative functions of IOs, will be excluded from the exam. We will not examine this chapter. It will be excluded from the exam. The chapter relating to executive and administrative functions of IOs, I mean chapter 5. Chapter 5. Then today we will begin to examine the existing today IOs by examining first of all the United Nations. The United Nations. Chapter 6, beginning from 167. 167. The United Nations. As for the United Nations, we will examine, in fact, 3 topics within our exam of the United Nations. First of all, number 1, the aims and principles for which the UN has been created, aims and principles. Number 2, second topic, what are the principal organs of the UN? Number 3, we will begin to examine the most important of these principal organs, I mean, for today, the General Assembly. The General Assembly. And for the next course, we will give, maybe on next Sunday, we'll examine the Security Council. The Security Council. And by our exam of this topic today, aims and principles, 2, the principal organs of the UN, 3, the General Assembly, and then next Saturday, next Sunday, the Security Council. It will be all the topics that we will examine together relating to the United Nations. To the United Nations. Then, I mean, we will examine together in the chapter relating to the United Nations from page 167 to page 198. Our exam of this chapter relating to the United Nations will go from page 167 to page 198. The other part is a book relating to the UN, I mean from page 199 to page 220 are excluded from the exam. Clear? That is relating to the UN. That we will examine it today and then next Sunday. I hope it is clear. Beginning our course of the UN. We have first of all to appreciate what are the stipulations in the UN Charter which promote what are the competences of the United Nations and how the United Nations have the obligation to promote and to implement these competences. I mean, the aims and the principles of the UN. The first topic is the aims and the principles of the UN. In fact, within Article 1 of the UN Charter, the competences of the UN are stipulated within Article 1 of the UN Charter. The aims for which the UN has been created, as you know, in 1945, after the end of the Second World War, the UN has been created to realize four principal aims. The most important aim, first one, to promote international peace and international security. That is the first and the most important aim for the realization of which the UN has been created. The aim of the aims of UN. The second aim of the UN, the second great competence of the UN, is the promotion of the right of each people for self-determination. Third one, the promotion of the international cooperation between states in economic matters, social matters, and for the promotion of the human rights in the international community. Last aim, to promote that the UN be the center for the international cooperation between states. I mean that by the fourth aim, what is promoted here is the multilateralism between states. Examining these aims, by examining these four aims, it appears that within the UN we are within an international organization, a universal international organization, having more than only one competence to achieve, We are not here within a specialized international organization. We are within an international organization having diversity of competences. But I can say here that we are within an international organization having a generality of competences, because as you know, and we have appreciated it before, the concepts, the notion of generality of competences is reserved only for states, because only states, because having sovereignty, because having, as we will examine it now, because having the right not that other states intervene in their internal affairs, then only states have generality of competences, and only states have what we give it the name of the plenitude of competences. The UN having, yes, more than one competence, but we can say a diversity of competences, not a generality of competences. The first aim relates to the promotion of the international peace and security. Second one, the promotion of the right of each people for self-determination. Third one, promotion of the international cooperation between states in economic, social matters, and for the promotion of human rights, human being. And the last one, that the UN must be the center for the international cooperation between all states. As the Article 1 of the UN Charter stipulated these aims without indication of what are the binding rules, what are the imperative rules by which each one of these four aims must be implemented by all states. In fact, the answer is negative. Yes, the UN Charter stipulated how each one of these four aims must be regulated, must be implemented by all states. And this has been stipulated in Article 2 of the UN Charter. Article 2 of the UN Charter. By the Article 2 of the UN Charter, each one of these precedent aims has been exempt as to how it will be promoted by the international community. And this has been operated in Article 2 by a juxtaposition of these four aims by 7 imperative rules to promote each one of them. 7 imperative rules by which each one of these four aims must be realized, must be promoted, must be implemented by all states members of international community. What are these imperative rules stipulated in Article 2 to promote the aims stipulated in Article 1? The first imperative rule relates to the promotion of the equal sovereignty between states, to promote equal sovereignty between states. Second one, to promote the implementation by each state of its obligation within respect of the principle of good faith. Within the respect of the principle of good faith. 3, the obligation not to recourse to war of aggression or to threat to peace by any state within its relation with the other states, not recourse to armed aggression, not recourse to threat to armed force by states in their mutual international relation. Then, within the UN Charter, for the first time, the war of aggression, the recourse to armed force in the international relations between states become forbidden. For it is a consequence from number 3, the obligation for all states to regulate their international conflicts by recoursing to peaceful means for solution of international disputes. I mean, to settle disputes by states by even diplomatic means or judicial one. Number 5, obligation for all states to give assistance to the United Nations for the accomplishment, for the promotion of its 4 aims. Lastly, the obligation for the UN and for all the states members of the international community not to interfere in the internal affairs of any states. Then, by these 4 aims stipulated in Article 1, by these principles stipulated in Article 2, we can say that here we are within a repartition of competences between matters which are considered by the United Nations Charter as being international obligations for states, matters within which no freedom for any states, I can say here we are with an international standard which must be respected by each state member of the international community in one hand, and other matter within which each state is free to realize its proper aim by its proper legislation, promoting peace and security, promoting human rights, promoting cooperation between states, promoting the respect of human rights, assistance of the UN, non-recourse to armed force, peaceful settlement of international disputes, promoting the respect of the principle of good faith, constitute the international standard, constitute the international obligation of states, member and non-member of the UN, member and non-member of the UN. Though, in the other hand, the promotion of the obligation for each state to respect the internal and the international sovereignty of foreign states, the obligation also for each one of the member states of the international community not to interfere in the internal affairs of other states constitute, in the other hand, the sphere of competence in which each one of the member states of the international community is free, because each one of them here is allowed by its proper sovereignty to exercise within freedom its internal and international competences that relate to the first topic. Then, that is relating to the first topic, aims and principles of the UN, the competence of the UN and how to achieve each one of them. I want only here to add that relating to the second aim of the UN, I mean the promotion of the right of each people for self-determination. In 1945, when the UN Charter has been concluded, the expression of the right of self-determination has had only one signification: the right for people established in their own states for democracy. Then the notion self-determination 1945 has had only one signification: the right for each people to be governed in their state by the system of democracy. I mean then the second aim relates to the promotion of the democracy in the international community. That was the only signification of this second aim. But from the beginning of the second decade of the practice of the UN, I mean from the beginning of 1960, between 1960 and 1970, this second aim, the right for each people for the promotion of self-determination, begin to have another signification also. Another signification. And this one relates also for another category of people. I mean people subordinated to the system of colonialism. People subordinated to the system of colonialism. Before 1960, between 1945 and 1960, the problem of decolonization constituted an internal matter for colonial states. But from 1960, within the practice of the General Assembly of the UN, the signification of the principle of the right for self-determination of each people then is resumed from this date to have both of two significations. In one hand, the right for democracy, and in the other hand, the right for each people subordinated to the system of colonialism to accede to their independence, to accede to its defendants. That is for the first topic, aims and principles of the UN. Second topic, as you know, from our exam of the general theory of the international organizations, in each one of IOs, the aims and the principles of each one of them are promoted by principles organ which are stipulated by their name in the treaty creating this or that or the international organization. Then in the Arab League Charter it is stipulated what are the principles organs by which the Arab League promote its aims and principles. In International Labour Organization also. That is the case here also relating to the UN. in the UN Charter, it is stipulated that the aims and principles of the UN in the UN must be promoted by 6 principles organs. By 6 principles organs. The first one, the plenary organ. The first one, the plenary organ, is the General Assembly. The General Assembly of the UN. The second one, the executive organ, is the Security Council of the UN. In the UN also, we have the administrative organ, that is the Secretariat. In the UN we have a 4th principal organ, a judiciary one, that is the International Court of Justice, and 2 other principal organs. One has the name of the Economic and Social Council, the 5th one, and the last one, the Trustship Council. The Trustship Council. The most important principal organs of the UN are the plenary one, the General Assembly, in one hand. In the second hand, the executive organ, the Security Council. 3, the judicial organ of the UN, I mean the International Court of Justice. And 4, the Secretariat of the UN. The Secretariat of the UN, the administrative organ. As it appears, relating to the plenary organ, General Assembly, relating to the executive organ, the Security Council, they are constituted by delegation of states, member states of the UN. It is not so, neither for the Secretariat nor for the International Court of Justice. Here and there, the Secretariat and the International Court of Justice are constituted by agents of the UN. Agents of the UN. We will examine the International Court of Justice next year, in the 2nd year, in our course relating to public international law. The Secretariat of the UN, we have examined the administrative organs of the UN within our exam of the theory of IOs. What is important here then is to examine both of the most important principal organs of the UN constituted by member states. I mean, in one hand, the General Assembly, and in the other hand, the Security Council. Today we will begin to examine the General Assembly. And to examine, in fact, the General Assembly of the UN, we have to do so by examining 5 axes. Number 1, the composition of the General Assembly of the UN. How is constituted the General Assembly of the United Nations? Number 2, how the General Assembly work, the system of work of the General Assembly. 3, the system of vote in the General Assembly. 4, the binding force of the resolution adopted by the General Assembly. 5, last point to examine, the competences of the General Assembly. The competences of the General Assembly. why I reserve for the exam of the point relating to the competences of the General Assembly the last point, because here, relating to this point, we will see that a complementarity exists within the UN Charter between the General Assembly and the Security Council relating to the exercise of one of these competences, only one of these competences. I mean this one relating to the promotion of the international peace and the international security. And here, within this matter, this competence, we will have to make a comparison between the competences of the Security Council relating to international peace and security and the competences of the General Assembly relating to the same matter. The General Assembly, first of all, composition. How the General Assembly is constituted. Here we promote the same principle existing as we examined before in all international organizations, universal one and regional one. The UN is a universal international organization by the stipulation of the UN Charter. The quality of membership is recognized for all states, only states member of international community, but as in regional international organization, the General Assembly is the plenary organ of the UN, and as the plenary organ of all international organizations, regional one, universal one, the plenary organ of all international organizations, and that is the case in the General Assembly of the UN, is composed of all the member states of the UN. In all international organizations, the plenary organ is constituted and composed of all the members of the concerned international organization. In the Arab League, the plenary organ composed of all the member states. In the International Labour Organization also, the plenary organ composed by all the member states, not as the situation in the executive organ for universal international organization, as the UN and as the International Labour Organization and as the International Bank, as we will say. Then, each member of the UN, because of its quality as member of the UN, have the right to be presented in the UN. And in the General Assembly to be presented also in the General Assembly as all the other members of the UN. Each member state of the UN has the right to be represented and to have a right of vote in the General Assembly of the UN. All the members of the UN then are represented in the General Assembly. That is the first point. Second one, the procedure of work in the General Assembly. How the General Assembly meets. The system of session in the General Assembly. As the General Assembly meet in permanence or in regular session only 1 or twice a year. Only 1 or twice a year. In fact, in all plenary organs of all international organizations, not only in the UN, in all plenary organs of all international organizations, universal one and regional one, universal one and regional one. The plenary organ doesn't meet in permanence, doesn't meet in permanence, meet only in regular session, only 1, twice, or 3 within 3 sessions each year. Within 3 sessions each year. In the UN, within the stipulations of the UN Charter, it is reiterated that the General Assembly meet in regular session only 1 time each year, from September to November, from the month of September to the month of November, in a regular session, in a regular session. Then the General Assembly doesn't meet within permanence. Is this mean that never the General Assembly, if confronted with a great problem, a great crisis, will not have the possibility to meet with an irregular session? The answer is no. It is possible for the General Assembly, within the stipulation of the UN Charter, to meet if a majority of positive votes, a majority of simple positive vote is occurred to meet in non-regular session, for example in February or March. But the principle for the sessions of the General Assembly is regular session only once a year, once a year. The third point to examine relating to the General Assembly. The system of vote. What is the system of vote in the General Assembly? Two principles here. Two principles here. First one, to promote the equality in sovereignty between the member states. The principle is that each member state has only one right of vote as the other member. This principle is promoted in the UN Charter. That is the principle. And also that is a principle recognized by the greatest number of the IOs existing today. But you know, as exceptions, some IOs adopt a system of weighted right of vote by which some states, greater states, may have more right of vote than other members, system existing, for example, in the International Monetary Fund or in the International Bank. But here we are within exceptions, and this exception is not recognized in the UN. Each state, I mean, and I speak within the General Assembly, each state has third one, system of vote. I said that we have here two principles. First one, each member state in the UN has only one right of vote. Second principle, what is the majority required for the adoption of resolution in the General Assembly? The principle here, by the stipulations of the UN Charter, is that the resolution adopted by the General Assembly are adopted by simple majority. Simple majority, not two-thirds majority. Simple majority of the voting states. Simple majority of the voting state, I mean at least 51% of the voting states. Simple majority. This means that never, by the stipulations of the UN Charter, it is required restricted majority, two-thirds majority. It is required by exception. In some matter, the majority of two-thirds of the voting states, and by the stipulations of the UN Charter, that is exhaustive. The cases in which it is required two-thirds majority. As for the adhesion of new states in the UN, the accession of new states in the UN, as for the suspension or the exclusion of a member state of the UN, as for the election by the General Assembly of the non-permanent member of the Security Council, as for all resolution adopted by the General Assembly with a matter relating to the promotion of international peace and international security. In all these matters, by exception, it is required within the stipulations of the UN Charter that the resolution within these matters must be adopted by the majority of two-thirds of the voting states. And when I say majority of the voting states, simple majority or two-thirds majority, I mean that we do not take into account here the states who do not participate to the right of vote by abstaining to vote or by being absent in the session where the question is examined. The majority of the voting state, not of the member of the General Assembly. Examining question number 4, which relate to the binding force of the resolution adopted by the General Assembly within the UN Charter. Principle and exceptions. Principle and exceptions. The principle. Within the principle stipulated in the UN Charter, it is reiterated that within the general rule, the resolutions adopted by the General Assembly by themselves, when adopted, I mean, in the moment they are adopted, are not binding, they are considered as recommendations. And we have examined before together in the course the distinction between binding resolution and the principle is that the binding resolution are adopted by the executive organ and the recommendation which are as a principle adopted by the plenary organ. And within the UN Charter, the principle in the plenary organ, I mean in the General Assembly, is that the General Assembly adopts recommendations, not binding resolution by themselves, not binding, by themselves. But that is the principle, because within the stipulations of the UN Charter, within some matters, the resolution adopted by the General Assembly are by themselves binding for all the member states of the UN. The voting yes, I mean, and the voting no. Binding for all the member states for the voting yes of the resolution and for the voting no. What are these matters? First of all, the admission of new member in the UN. If the majority required 2/3 is satisfied, a new member in the UN is considered as so, even within the relation of states who vote against his admission. It was the case, for example, when the General Assembly voted in 1949 for the admission of Israel in the UN. This resolution by itself was binding for all member states, even for the Arab states who vote in this time against the admission of Israel in the UN. But what is binding, by exception for the resolutions adopted by the General Assembly, not only the matter relating to admission of new member in the UN, also the question and the matters relating to the suspension. It is a sanction, a suspension of one member states in the UN if he violates the aims and the principles of the UN, also for the sanction of the exclusion of a state, a member state from the UN, here also. But we will say, when examining the Security Council, that here we are within complementarity of competences between the General Assembly and the Security Council. Both of them examine this matter, the accession of a new member, suspension, and exclusion from the UN. Other topic within which the resolution of the General Assembly is binding within the stipulation of the UN Charter, yes. The decision of the General Assembly relating to the election of the non-permanent member in the Security Council, a binding resolution for all member states who vote yes and who vote no. The resolution of the General Assembly relating to the election of the judges of the International Court of Justice. Here also we are within resolution which are by the stipulation of the UN Charter binding by themselves. The resolution adopted by the General Assembly to elect the General Secretary of the UN. Cases in which all the resolution adopted by the General Assembly here are binding by themselves. But the principle, as I said now, that in the General Assembly the rule, the principle is that the resolutions of the General Assembly as considered as not binding resolution, recommendations. But we have here to examine a problematic. The recommendations adopted by the General Assembly are, yes or no, important as normative rules. Each day, from 1945 until now, each day, the General Assembly adopts about 20 recommendations relating to all the aims and the principles of the UN. In fact, these recommendations adopted by the General Assembly has a normative rule. And I mean by normative rules, that these resolution may be, after their adoption, binding by a way or another way. After their adoption, not by the stipulation of the UN Charter, because they are not by these stipulation binding by themselves when they are adopted, but they may, it is possible that these resolutions, after being adopted, then in the future of their adoption, they may have a normative rule. In one of two ways. How? First of all, a recommendation for the voting states. Yes, for the states who vote yes for the adoption of the resolution. For the states who vote yes for the adoption of the resolution. This resolution becomes within the relation between the voting states yes and the General Assembly as a binding resolution. Why? Because of the vote yes. I mean because of the consent of the voting state yes relating to the project of resolution before its adoption. When some states, the majority required, simple majority, or two-thirds majority, vote yes relating to a project presented before the General Assembly, these states, not the voting states no, the voting state yes, by their vote yes, consent that this resolution adopted will be within their relation within the General Assembly will be a binding resolution. As in this case, they will have the obligation to respect the recommendation and to implement it. Why? Because they give their consent to the adoption of this resolution. By their acceptance of the resolution, they become, by their acceptance of the resolution, they become in the obligation to respect it. And it appears here that if we are, in this case, within an obligation incumbing upon this state, it will be because of their acceptance of the resolution, then because of their exercise of their proper sovereignty by voting yes. By voting yes. That is the first perspective by which a recommendation may be a binding resolution. But as we have said now, it will be only for the voting state yes. For the voting state yes. By another perspective, a recommendation adopted by the General Assembly may be binding in the future not only for the voting state yes, but also for the voting state no. I mean here that even the states, the minority of states who vote against the adoption of the resolution may in the future, after the adoption of this resolution, may be in the obligation to implement it as a binding rule, as a binding obligation, as a binding obligation. When? What is this second perspective? The second perspective appears when the recommendation adopted by the General Assembly will be repeated by adoption several times. Repeatance with an adoption of a same recommendation. Repeatance within the complementarity of the conviction by the voting states, yes, that by this continuity in the adoption of the same recommendation, a conviction appear for them, for this majority, that this recommendation constitutes a binding customary rule of international law. As you know, even within the internal system of law, repeatance of a conduct plus a conviction that this conduct by the majority constitute an international legal obligation, this make rise to the creation of a new customary rule. And here, the new customary rule will be binding not only for parties who vote yes, who accept, who consent to this customary rule, but also relating to the parties who do not consent to its adoption, And in fact, many of the resolutions adopted by the General Assembly, by this procedure, the procedure of the creation of new rule by a customary system, has become binding for all member and non-member of the United Nations organization. As example for it, here, in the beginning of this course, I have said that in 1945, the second aim of the UN relating to the right for each people for self-determination have had only one signification. I mean, the right for each people established in their own state for the promotion of the system of democracy. Then, not for the promotion of the phenomenon of decolonization. This second signification has been promoted as another signification for the right for self-determination, and here for people subordinated to the system of colonialism by the General Assembly from 1960, by repeated resolution adopted between 1960s and 1970, creating then a new custom. Then we have examined, relating to the General Assembly of the United Nations, its plenary organ, as you know. Point 1, the composition of the General Assembly. Point 2, the system of meeting in the General Assembly. Point 3, the system of vote in the General Assembly. Point 4, the binding force of the resolutions adopted by the General Assembly. Now we will go to examine the last point relating to the General Assembly. I mean the competences of the General Assembly. Why I reserve the examination of this topic as to be the last one? It was possible, maybe also logic, to examine it before. In fact, it will be only for factual elements. Why? Because of some complementarity which exists between the activities of the General Assembly and the activity of the Security Council relating to only one of the competences of the General Assembly. Only one. As you know, from the first point we have examined, first topic we have examined in the course of today when we examined the aims and the principles of the UN, the first topic, the aims and the principles of the UN, we have 4 aims. The UN have been created to promote and to implement 4 aims. 1, the promotion of international peace and security. 2, the promotion of self-determination of each people. 3, promotion of international cooperation in economic, social field between states and for the promotion of the human rights. 4, that the UN be the center of the international cooperation between all state members of the international community. Relating to the aim 2, 3, and 4, these 3 aims, their implementation, their promotion are reserved only to General Assembly. Why? Because the General Assembly is the plenary organ of the UN. The plenary organ means that here we are within the organ having the plenitude of competences to examine all the aims of the UN. plenary organ having the competence to examine all the aims of the UN. It is not the case for the executive organ in all international organizations, and also as so in the UN. The executive organ of the UN is the Security Council. It has only the competence to achieve the most important between the aims of the UN, I mean the promotion of the international peace and international security. Then, within the aim 2, 3, and 4, these three aims, 2, 3, and 4, reserved only to the General Assembly. No prerogative, no competence to the Security Council to examine any one of them. But relating to the aim number 1, the promotion of the international peace and the international security, here we are within a prerogative, an aim recognized in common between the General Assembly in one hand and the Security Council in the second hand. And this within the stipulation of the UN Charter. But as we will appreciate it in our following course relating to the Security Council, here and within the stipulations of the UN Charter, it appears that the competences of the Security Council relating to this aim are more important than the competences of the General Assembly. I mean that a priority is recognized in the UN Charter for the Security Council relating to the promotion of this aim than it is for the General Assembly. And for this effect, we will examine now within this fifth point the competences of the General Assembly relating to the promotion of all of these four aims. But within taking into account that relating to the first one, the aim relating to the promotion of the international peace and security, it will be better to examine the prerogative of the General Assembly relating to this aim within some complementarity with the exam of the competences of the Security Council relating to this same matter, because of the priority recognized to the Security Council relating to this matter upon the General Assembly. Then, relating to this last aim, competences of the General Assembly, now we will examine the competences of the General Assembly which are not common with the Security Council. I mean, aim number 2, promotion of self-determination. Aim number 3, promotion of international cooperation between states in social, economic, cultural, international trades between states, and for the promotion of the rights of each individual, for the promotion of its human rights and freedom, and that the UN be the center of the international cooperation between states. Aim 2, 3, and 4 reserved for the General Assembly. Aim 1, common between the General Assembly and the Security Council, and then we will examine the attribution recognized by the Charter of the UN to the General Assembly when examining the chapter relating to the Security Council, because of the priority recognized in the UN Charter for the Security Council relating to this matter upon the attribution recognized to the General Assembly. Beginning by aim number 2, the promotion of the right of each people for self-determination. And as I said before, in 1945, the expression self-determination has had the meaning as that the system of democracy constitutes one of the aims of the UN, the obligation incumbent for all states as to promote in their territory the system of democracy constitute an international obligation, constitute one of the aims of the UN. Then, totalist states violate the UN Charter. Each institution in one state who doesn't attribute to each people its right to participate to the establishment of the future of the aims of the people will be within a violation of this second aim of the UN. The system of democracy doesn't constitute then, because it constitutes one of the aims of the UN, an internal affair of any state, that is an international affair, an international obligation. Self-determination, within its first signification attributed in 1945, but within its second signification recognized from 1960 by the customary rule, the self-determination of each people relates also to the right for all people subordinated to colonial states to acquire their independence and to constitute their independent states. And then, in fact, from 1960 until now, about all the colonies receive their independence and become member of the UN. The UN in 1945, when the UN has been created, its member was only 51 states. 1945. Now we are within 193 member states of the UN. The great majority of them constituted before 1945 and after 1945 colonialist territories subordinated to European states. all people subordinated to colonialism received until now their independence? Yes or no? As a principle, the greatest majority of them acquire their independence within, for example, the case of the Palestinian people. Until now, a people who hasn't received its right for self-determination. And within the General Assembly, a subcommittee, a subsidiary organ of the General Assembly has the name of the Committee for Decolonization, a committee for decolonization, and this committee examines in all the session of the UN the question of Palestine, the question of Palestine, and also we have in the General Assembly a subcommittee, a subsidiary organ of the General Assembly, which mandate is to examine, to suspect, and to promote the rights of the Palestinian refugees. The Palestinian refugees. That is relating to the second aim, the right for self-determination of each people. Relating to the third aim, the promotion of the international cooperation between states, in one hand, in economic, social, cultural matters, and in the other hand, for the promotion of human rights, for the promotion of human rights, without distinction. Without distinction. In fact, the promotion of the international cooperation between states in economic, social, political matters means that some matter, before being regulated in multilateral treaties, constituted before internal matters. But after being regulated by states in multilateral treaties, here these matters will be considered as international obligation for states. For states. I give an example relating to international trade. International trade. As before 1947, each state was allowed to regulate its import-export of goods as he see, within its proper appreciation. To offer subventions, for example, for its goods, to restrict the importation of goods from other states, but from 1947, from this date, we are within an international system for the international trade between states, and here restriction appear for the freedom of each one of the member states of the international community, for the promotion of the trade of each one of them in their mutual international relation. Other example, the international solidarity between states relating to the welfare of each one of them, before no obligation, for example, for any state to give assistance to other states if one of them has epidemic. For example, if one of them is victim of an internal armed conflict. Now it is not so. An international obligation for solidarity between states when one of them is victim of an internal crisis. Within the topic of human rights, also we are within the third aim. Before the creation of the UN, the question of the human rights constitutes an internal affair in each state. I mean, the public institutions in each state have had the prerogative, the right, the freedom to regulate its relation with individual as he wanted. The sum values of human rights and freedom was not then common between all individuals constituting all the members of the international community. Now it is not so. Within aim number 3 of the UN Charter, the respect of the fundamental rights and the fundamental freedom for all individuals without distinction constitute one of the principal aims of the UN. Then, as a consequence, no state now is allowed to violate نكمل نخلص. Then, relating to the national dimensions of the human rights in each state, now we are within an obligation by the stipulation of the UN Charter, within which not only the legislations of each state, but also the constitutions of each state must be conform to the recognizing for each national in his state of his human rights and his freedom. The recognizing of human rights and international freedom constitute now then an international obligation incumbent for all states, and never a state may pretend that this matter constitute an internal matter as for democracy. The last aim recognize also to the General Assembly as to exam relates to this fourth aim, relating to that all the members of the UN has obligation as to promote that the UN organization itself, and here by its plenary organ, I mean the General Assembly, must be the center for the international cooperation between its members. We have said that within the third aim of the UN, the third aim of the UN relate to the obligation for all states to cooperate between themselves, bilateral regional cooperation between states. But within the fourth aim, here, by this fourth aim, the UN Charter, in Article 1, reiterates that the cooperation between states must be by multilateralism system, by universality. By universality. I mean within the UN itself. The UN, a universal organization, is member now 193. Then the UN Charter, within its fourth aim, promotes what we can give it the name of the transparency of the international cooperation, that the international cooperation between states must be realized in the UN within transparency, in its principal organ, the plenary one, and then the fourth aim, when realized, will by itself make end to the secret agreements concluded between states by bilateral treaty or by regional treaty to violate the rights of third states. The transparency of the international cooperation between states by itself promotes that this practice goes to its end. And relating to that, in fact, by the stipulation of the UN Charter, it is reiterated that all treaties concluded between states, bilateral treaties, regional treaties, and also multilateral treaties, must be deposited in the UN. Must be deposited in the UN to promote this transparency of the collaboration and the cooperation between states. Then never a state can request from the General Assembly the respect by another state who contract with him before a bilateral treaty if the treaty has not been deposited in the UN, and when this treaty constitutes a violation of the prerogative of one of the contracting states. I give an example here. Suppose that a bilateral treaty has been concluded between State X and State Y. The president of the State X, within this treaty concluded with the State Y, consent to give a part of the territory of his state to the State Y. And this treaty is secret, not deposited in the UN. In the future, never the State X will be allowed to request from the General Assembly that this treaty go to its end. It will have to do so only by bilateral way with the State Y. That is to prove why the fourth aim of the UN as to promote that the UN must be the center of the multilateral cooperation between states is so important, we have examined yet until now, because the General Assembly is the plenary organ of the UN, its competences to examine aim number 2, aim number 3, and aim number 4. The aim number 1, I mean the promotion of international peace and international security, because it is common in its promotion between the plenary organ, the General Assembly, and the executive organ, the Security Council, we will examine it next week to appreciate how, by the stipulations of the UN Charter, the principal organ having the competences to promote this aim is not the General Assembly, because it is the Security Council, and how exceptional competences are recognized to the General Assembly relating to the promotion of international peace and international security. Then, in our future course, we will examine the Security Council by examining 1, composition, 2, how it's work, the session, 3, system of vote, 4, binding force of the resolution adopted by the Security Council, and lastly, the competences of the Security Council relating to the promotion of the international peace and security. And here we will make a comparison between the competences relating to this aim between the General Assembly in one hand and the Security Council in the other hand. I mean, within this matter, we will examine how, by the stipulations of the UN Charter, a repartition of competence has been implemented between the Security Council in one hand and the General Assembly in the other hand, relating to the promotion of the international peace and the international security, which constitute, as I said before, the most important aim for the realization of which the UN has been created. And the most important aim being, as so, from the creation of the UN and until now, the most important aim, the most important matter constituting the question as to know if the UN have had achieved with success its competences relating to the promotion of the international peace and the international security, yes or no. Thank you, dear students, and see you later next week. I hope, sure, that our problematic with the virus of corona will go to its end, and that we'll be able in the future, as I will be pleased to meet you in our courses together here in the faculty. Thank you.